recite 1,000 times the Avalokiteshvara 6-syllable mantra. Each of you, please recite 1,000 times, which means in a mala, right, it's 10 malas. He said, because Avalokiteshvara has a special connection, His Holiness reminds the Tibetan people, has a special connection to the Tibetan people. Therefore, he said, if you all want to mark my birthday, then please do that mantra. Then His Holiness repeated how he said, I always say that I am a servant of Avalokiteshvara, of the Buddha of Compassion. He said, he's my boss, and I do his work. And so he said, because of historical karmic connections, there is also said to be a very close connection between Avalokiteshvara and the Dalai Lamas. So very humbly, His Holiness said special connection. But in fact, what the tradition says is the Dalai Lama is the emanation of the Buddha of Compassion. So anyway, His Holiness said, so for purposes of practicing pure vision, developing pure view, he says, for those of you who want, when you recite this 6-syllable mantra, you should think, imagine, visualize Avalokiteshvara and His Holiness the Dalai Lama as being inseparable in nature. That in essence they are one. He says, or if you can't do that, then the other thing to do is to then imagine or visualize His Holiness, he says, as a simple monk sitting at the foot of the throne of the Buddha of Compassion, as a servant of the Buddha of Compassion. And he says, that's good too. Then he says, in particular then, as you do this practice, as you recite this 1,000 times this Mani mantra, you should understand, do it from the spirit of bodhicitta. So I think many of you already know what bodhicitta means. So without spending more time talking, we shall do this 1,000 recitation this morning of the Mani mantra. And since during Sakadawa, we were using this text, this sadhana called the visualization and recitation of the Great Compassionate One, a daily recitation after receiving the base empowerment, which is a practice from the Namju Terma cycle of 13 Mingyu Dorje. So since we were doing this text during Sakadawa, then we are going to continue and just use this text since most of us are familiar with this text. If one of you, either on Facebook or on Zoom, can be so kind to type the link to, I think it's the udharmanc.com/Sakadawa. I think this text is still available on there. If you can share it with the Facebook community on Urban Dharma page where this is being live streamed, that'll be good. Yeah. So we will begin with the usual opening prayers, Drigong Kagyu tradition. Dala Dhamma Jebe Dha Nobar Jebe Gek Dharba Dan Tham Je Gembe Bardu Jobra Jeba Tham Jegis Jebe Ma Nanga Dang Nambe Senjen Tham Je Dewa Dan Den Dungao Dandre Nudu Lana Me Bayan Dabra Zobe Janju Rinpoche Dobra Je Dala Dhamma Jebe Dha Nobar Jebe Gek Dharba Dan Tham Je Tamje Kembe Bardu Jobra Jeba Tam Jegi Su Jebe Ma Nangka Dang Nambe Senjen Tamje Dewa Dan Ten Tungya Tande Nerde Lana Me Bayan Tabra Zobe Janju Rimba Je Dobra Je Dala Damba Jebe Da Nobra Jebe Ge Tarba Da Tamche Kembe Bardu Jobra Jeba Tam Jegi Se Jeba Ma Nangka Nambe Senjen Tamje Dewa Dan Ten Tungya Tande Nerde Lana Me Bayan Dabra Zobe Janju Rinpoche Dobra Je De Du Samma Geki Bardu Lunga Yisum Kevala Ku Mashi Bardu Lunga Yisum Kevala Ku Dering Ne Sunde Nema Santa Samgi Bardu Lunga Yisum Kevala Ku Jodan Sogi Jonamla Chanju Bardu Dane Kapsuji Dake Jinsu Gibe Sonange Drola Penche Sange Drupra Shu Sange Jodan Sogi Jonamla Chanchu Bardu Dane Kapsuji Dake Jinsu Gibe Sonange Drola Penche Sange Drupra Shu Sange Jodan Sogi Jonamla Chanchu Bardu Dane Kapsuji Dake Jinsu Gibe Sonange Drola Panche Sanje Drupra Shu Nangka Dan Nyampe Senjen Tamje Deva Dan Dewen Gindan Tempura Gyuji Dungya Dan Dunya Gyu Dan Dreva Gyuji Dungya Mepe Deva Dhamme Dreva Gyuji Niring Chadang Nidang Dreva Tanyong Lan Nepra Gyuji Ma Nangka Dan Nyampe Senjen Tamje Deva Dan Dewe Gindan Tempura Gyuji Dungya Dan Dunya Gyu Dan Dreva Gyuji Dungya Mepe Deva Dame Drava Gyuji Nering Chadang Nidang Drava Tang Nyong La Nepra Gyuji Ma Nangka Dang Nampe Senjen Tamje Dewa Dang Dewe Gindan Tempra Gyuji Dunya Dang Dunya Gyudan Drava Gyuji Dunya Mepe Dewa Dame Drava Gyuji Nering Chadang Nidang Drava Tang Nyong La Nepra Gyuji Sanche Buju Jushe Medo Dram Rira Linche Ninde Gempa De Sanje Shingla Mekde Powa Ye Drogo Namda Shindu Jopara Jo Om Guru Deva Dha Gini Rana Mendala Pradeja So. So now to the Avalokiteshvara practice, starting on page 1. Let's do this together in English. To you, 3 jewels and 3 roots, all you sources of refuge, I go for refuge. To establish all migratory beings as Buddhas, I give rise to supreme bodhicitta. To you, 3 jewels and 3 roots, all you sources of refuge, I go for refuge. To establish all migratory beings as Buddhas, I give rise to supreme bodhicitta. To you, 3 jewels and 3 roots, all you sources of refuge, I go for refuge. To establish all migratory beings as Buddhas, I give rise to supreme bodhicitta. To the 3 jewels I go for refuge, I confess each misdeed and non-virtue, and rejoice in the virtue of migratory beings. I will also be mindful of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Assembly, I go for refuge until awakening is reached. To fully accomplish the benefit of both self and other, I generate the awakening mind. Having generated supreme awakened mind, I will serve all sentient beings and delightfully engage in the supreme deeds of the Bodhisattvas. For the benefit of migratory beings, may I accomplish Buddhahood. I am the great compassionate one, white in color, with one face and 4 arms, with palms together and holding mala and lotus. Legs crossed, adorned with jewels and silks, seated on a lotus and moon seat. Om Mani Padme Hum. Then visualize white-colored Lord of the world of the God realm with one face, 4 arms, palms together, holding a veena and a lotus, seated cross-legged on the moon. Om Swaha, which is the white colored Lord of the world, sits in front, looking inside to the central Avalokiteshvara. All 7 Avalokiteshvaras are basically your own nature. And in this context, also to think the nature of Avalokiteshvara and the nature of His Holiness the Dalai Lama are indistinguishable, inseparable, of the same essence. Then visualize green-colored Lord of the world of the demigod realm with one face, 4 arms, palms together, holding sword and armor and a lotus, seated cross-legged on the moon. Om Ma Swaha. Visualize multicolored Lord of the world of the human realm with one face, 4 arms, palms together, holding a mala and a lotus, seated cross-legged on the moon. Om Ni Swaha. So the second Avalokiteshvara is at the 2 o'clock position, and the third Avalokiteshvara, the 6th surrounding Avalokiteshvara. So the third is on the 4 o'clock position, then 6 o'clock, then 8 o'clock, then 10 o'clock. Visualize smoke-colored Lord of the world of the animal realm with one face, 4 arms, palms together, holding a scripture and a lotus, seated cross-legged on the moon. Om Bhat Swaha. Visualize red-colored Lord of the world of the Preta realm with one face, 4 arms, palms together, holding a chest box and a lotus, seated cross-legged on the moon. Om Me Swaha. Visualize black-colored Lord of the world of the Hell realm with one face, 4 arms, palms together, holding fire and water and a lotus, seated cross-legged on the moon. Om Hong Swaha. Thus, in the heart center of the principal deity among the 7 great compassionate ones is a Shri on the moon seat, surrounded by the 6 syllables. In the heart center of the surrounding 6 are their respective seat syllables, such as Om and so forth, and also surrounded by the 6 syllables. Om Mani Padme Hum Re, Om Mani Padme Hum Re, Om Mani Padme Hum Re, Om Mani Padme Hum Re. Om Mani Padme Hum Re, Om Mani Padme Hum Re, Om Mani Padme Hum Re, Om Mani Padme Hum Re. Om Mani Padme Hum Re, 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 Om Mani Om mane padme hum re. 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 So here I also want to read for you the three commitments that His Holiness the Dalai Lama has publicly said, that he has three commitments in his life, and the time that he has left with us. And he says, he hopes that he will be here until he is at least 108. And so he says, your collective recitation of 1,000 Mani mantra can be dedicated. The merit that arises from there, if you want, can be dedicated to him in this lifetime, remaining here with us till he is 108. And so, or 110, he says, 108, 110, he says. So he says the three commitments. One, as a human being, finding ways to promote human values such as compassion, forgiveness, tolerance, contentment, and self-discipline. All human beings are the same. We all want to gain happiness and avoid suffering. Even those who do not believe in religion recognize the importance of human values as a source of happiness in their lives. His Holiness calls this human values as secular ethics. So he says this is one commitment that he has. So this one, you could say, is like the broadest, right, commitment. Second, as a religious practitioner, finding ways to promote religious harmony and understanding among the major religious traditions of the world. There are ideological and philosophical differences among religious traditions. And so His Holiness always emphasizes that there are differences, but we need not be encumbered by those differences when it comes to working together for the good, for the greater good. Yeah. So there are ideological and philosophical differences among religious traditions, but they all have the same potential to create good human beings. It is therefore important for all religious traditions to respect one another and to recognize the value of each other's respective tradition. One truth and one religion are relevant on an individual level, but for the community at large, several truths, several religions are necessary. And third, as a Tibetan holding the title of the Dalai Lama, who is fully trusted by Tibetan people both within and outside Tibet, the third commitment is to endeavor to preserve the Buddhist culture, to strive for Tibet's cause, and to assume the role of an independent spokesperson of Tibetan people living under oppression. So we also pray for the fulfillment of these three commitments of His Holiness. Om mani padme hum 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 mani padme Umane beme hung 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 umane Umane beme hung umane beme hung umane beme hung umane beme hung umane I also want to, in between, read some of the teachings of His Holiness, particularly teachings that he gave on the 8 verses of mind training. So the first verse of the 8 verses of mind training is, with the determination to achieve the highest aim for the benefit of all sentient beings, which surpasses even the wish-fulfilling gem, may I hold them dear at all times. So then His Holiness said, so this is available on His Holiness's official website. So it says here, His Holiness said, these 4 lines are about cultivating a sense of holding dear all other sentient beings. The main point this verse emphasizes is to develop an attitude that enables you to regard other sentient beings as precious, much in the manner of precious jewels. The question could be raised, why do we need to cultivate the thought that other sentient beings are precious and valuable? In one sense, we can say that other beings are really the principal source of all our experiences of joy, happiness, and prosperity. And not only in terms of our day-to-day dealings with people. We can see that all the desirable experiences that we cherish and aspire to attain are dependent upon cooperation and interaction with other sentient beings. It is an obvious fact. Similarly, from the point of view of a practitioner on the path, many of the high levels of realization that you gain and the progress you make on your spiritual journey are dependent upon cooperation and interaction with other sentient beings. Furthermore, at the resultant state of Buddhahood, the truly compassionate activities of a Buddha can come about spontaneously without any effort only in relation to sentient beings, because they are the recipients and beneficiary of those enlightened activities. So one can see that other sentient beings are, in a sense, the true source of our joy, prosperity, and happiness. Basic joys and comforts of life, such as food, shelter, clothing, and companionship, are all dependent upon other sentient beings, as is even fame and renown. Our feelings of comfort and a sense of security are dependent upon other people's perceptions of us and their affection for us. It is almost as if human affection is the very basis of our existence, it is almost as if human affection is the very basis of our existence. Our life cannot start without affection, and our sustenance, proper growth, and so on, all depend on it. In order to achieve a calm mind, the more you have a sense of caring for others, the deeper your satisfaction will be. I think that the very moment you develop a sense of caring, others appear more positive. This is because of our own attitude. On the other hand, if you reject others, they will appear to you in a negative way. Another thing that is quite clear to me is that the moment you think only of yourself, the focus of your whole mind narrows. And because of this narrow focus, uncomfortable things can appear huge and bring you fear and discomfort and a sense of feeling of overwhelmed by misery. But the moment you think of others with a sense of caring, however, your mind widens. Within that wider angle, your own problems appear to be of no significance, and this makes a big difference. If you have a sense of caring for others, you will manifest a kind of inner strength in spite of your own difficult situations and problems. With this strength, your problems will seem less significant and bothersome. By going beyond your own problems and taking care of others, you gain inner strength, self-confidence, courage, and greater sense of calm. This is a clear example of how one's way of thinking can really make a difference. His Holiness has more to say on this point. But we continue with the chanting of the Mani, keeping in mind what we just heard from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Om mani padme hum 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 mani Umane beme hung 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 umane beme umane beme hung 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 umane beme umane beme hung 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 umane beme umane beme hung 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 umane beme umane beme hung umane beme hung umane beme hung umane beme umane beme hung umane beme hung umane beme hung umane beme hung. The second verse. Whenever I interact with someone, may I view myself as the lowest among all, and from the very depths of my heart, respectfully hold others as superior. So His Holiness continues. The first verse pointed to the need to cultivate the thought of regarding all other beings as precious. In this second verse, the point being made is that the recognition of the preciousness of other sentient beings and the sense of caring that you develop on that basis should not be grounded on the feeling of pity toward other sentient beings, that is, on the thought that they are inferior. Rather, what is being emphasized is a sense of caring for other sentient beings and a recognition of their preciousness based on reverence and respect as superior beings. I would like to emphasize here how we should understand compassion in the Buddhist context. Generally speaking, in the Buddhist tradition, compassion and loving kindness are seen as two sides of the same thing. Compassion is said to be the empathetic wish that aspires to see the object of compassion, the sentient being, free from suffering. Loving kindness is the aspiration that wishes happiness upon others. In this context, love and compassion should not be confused with love and compassion in the conventional sense. For example, we experience a sense of closeness towards people who are dear to us. We feel a sense of compassion and empathy for them. We also have strong love for these people, but often this love or compassion is grounded in self-referential considerations. So-and-so is my friend, my spouse, my children, and so on. What happens with this kind of love or compassion, which may be strong, is that it is tinged with attachment because it involves self-referential considerations. Once there is attachment, there is also the potential for anger and hatred to arise. Attachment goes hand in hand with anger and hatred. For example, if one's compassion towards someone is tinged with attachment, it can easily turn into its emotional opposite due to the slightest incident. Then, instead of wishing that person to be happy, you might wish that person to be miserable. True compassion and love in the context of training of the mind is based on the simple recognition that others, just like myself, naturally aspire to be happy and to overcome suffering, and that others, just like myself, have the natural right to fulfill that basic aspiration. The empathy you develop toward a person based on recognition of this fact is universal compassion. There's no element of prejudice, no element of discrimination. This compassion is able to be extended to all sentient beings, so long as they are capable of experiencing pain and happiness. Thus, the essential feature of true compassion is that it is universal and not discriminatory. As such, training the mind and cultivating compassion in the Buddhist tradition first involves cultivating a thought of even-mindedness or equanimity toward all sentient beings. For example, you may reflect upon the fact that such and such a person may be your friend, your relative, and so forth in this life, but that same person may have been, from a Buddhist point of view, your worst enemy in a past life. Similarly, you apply the same sort of reasoning to someone you consider an enemy. Although this person may be negative towards you and is your enemy in this life, he or she could have been your best friend in a past life, or could have been related to you, and so on. Reflecting upon the fluctuating nature of one's relationship with others, and also on the potential that exists in all sentient beings to be friends and enemies, you develop this even-mindedness of equanimity. Now the third verse, in all my deeds may I probe into my mind, and as soon as a mental and emotional afflictions arise, as they endanger myself and others, may I strongly confront them and avert them. Then His Holiness continues. This verse really gets to the heart of what could be called the essence of the practice of the Buddha Dharma. When we talk about Dharma in the context of a Buddhist teachings, we are talking about nirvana, or freedom from suffering. Freedom from suffering, nirvana, or cessation is the true Dharma. There are many levels of cessation. For example, restraint from killing or murder could be a form of Dharma. But this cannot be called Buddha Dharma specifically, because restraint from killing is something that even someone who is non-religious can adopt as a result of following the law. The essence of the Dharma in the Buddhist tradition is that state of freedom from suffering and defilements or kleshas that lie at the root of suffering. This verse addresses how to combat these defilements and afflictive emotions and thoughts. One could say that for a Buddhist practitioner, the real enemy is this enemy within, these mental and emotional defilements. It is these emotional and mental afflictions that give rise to pain and suffering. The real task of a Buddha Dharma practitioner is to defeat this inner enemy. Since applying antidotes to these mental and emotional defilements lies at the heart of the Dharma practice and is in some sense its foundation, the third verse suggests that it is very important to cultivate mindfulness right from the beginning. Otherwise, if you let negative emotions and thoughts arise inside you without any sense of restraint, without any mindfulness of their negativity, then in a sense you are giving them free rein. They can then develop to the point where there is simply no way to counter them. However, if you develop mindfulness of their negativity, then when they occur, you will be able to stamp them out as soon as they arise. You will not give them the opportunity or the space to develop into full-blown negative thoughts. The way in which this third verse suggests we apply an antidote is, I think, at the level of the manifested and the felt experience of emotion. Instead of getting at the root of emotion in general, what is being suggested is the application of antidotes that are appropriate to specific negative emotions and thoughts. For example, to counter anger, you should cultivate love and compassion. To counter strong attachment to an object, you should cultivate thoughts about the impurity of that object, its undesirable nature, and so on. To counter one's arrogance or pride, you need to reflect upon shortcomings in you that can give rise to a sense of humility. For example, you can think about all the things in the world about which you are completely ignorant. Take the sign language interpreter here in front of me. When I look at her and see the complex gestures with which she performs the translation, I haven't a clue what is going on. And to see that is quite a humbling experience. From my own personal experience, whenever I have a little tingling sense of pride, I think of computers. It really calms me down. The fourth verse, when I see beings of unpleasant character, oppressed by strong negativity and suffering, may I hold them dear, for they are rare to find, as if I have discovered a jewel treasure. This verse refers to the special case of relating to people who are socially marginalized, perhaps because of their behavior, their appearance, their destitution, or on account of some illness. Whoever practices bodhicitta must take special care of these people, as if on meeting them, you have found a real treasure. Instead of feeling repulsed, a true practitioner of these altruistic principles should engage and take on the challenge of relating. In fact, the way we interact with people of this kind could give a great impetus to our spiritual practice. This is what His Holiness says. I want to footnote that and say, those of you who have Facebook and who have friends who, Facebook friends who perhaps express political opinions that you disagree with and that you find really despicable, now learn to cherish them. You don't have to cherish their views, but you have to cherish them. You have to particularly think of them as precious treasure, very difficult to find. Coming back to His Holiness's commentary. In this context, I would like to point out the great example set by many Christian brothers and sisters who engage in the humanitarian and caring professions, especially directed at marginalized members of society. One such example in our times was the late Mother Teresa, who dedicated her life to caring for the destitute. She exemplified the ideal that is described in this verse. It is on account of this important point that when I meet members of Buddhist centers in various parts of the world, I often point out to them that it is not sufficient for a Buddhist center simply to have programs of teaching or meditation. There are, of course, very impressive Buddhist centers and some retreat centers where the Western monks have been trained so well that they are capable of playing the clarinet in a traditional Tibetan way. But I also emphasize to them the need to bring the social and caring dimension into their program of activities so that the principles presented in the Buddhist teachings can make a contribution to society. Next, when others out of jealousy treat me wrongly with abuse, slander, and scorn, may I take upon myself the defeat and offer to others the victory. So His Holiness continues, the point that is made here is that when others provoke you, perhaps for no reason or unjustly, instead of reacting in a negative way, as true practitioner of altruism, you should be able to be tolerant towards them. You should remain unperturbed by such treatment. In the next verse, we learn that not only should we be tolerant of such people, but in fact, we should view them as our spiritual teachers. Therefore, it reads, when someone whom I have helped or in whom I have placed great hopes mistreats me with extremely hurtful ways, may I regard him still as my precious teacher. In Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, there is an extensive discussion of how we can develop this kind of attitude and how we can actually learn to see those who perpetrate harm on us as objects of spiritual learning. And also in the third chapter of Chandakirti's Entry to the Middle Way, they are profoundly inspiring and effective teachings on the cultivation of patience and tolerance. Om mani padme hum, 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 Then the seventh verse, in brief, may I offer benefit and joy to all my mothers, both directly and indirectly. May I quietly take upon myself all hurts and pains of my mothers. So then His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, continues. Yeah? He says, this verse presents a specific Buddhist practice known as the practice of giving and taking, Donglen. And it is by means of the visualization of giving and taking that we practice equalizing and exchanging ourselves with others. Exchanging ourselves with others should not be taken in the literal sense of turning oneself into the other and the other into oneself. This is impossible in any case. What is meant here is a reversal of attitudes one normally has towards oneself and others. We tend to relate to this so-called self as a precious core at the center of our being. Something that is really worth taking care of to the extent that we're willing to overlook the well-being of others. In contrast, our attitude towards others often resembles indifference. At best, we may have some concern for them, but even this may simply remain at the level of feeling or an emotion. On the whole, we are indifferent. We have towards others' well-being and do not take it seriously. So the point of this particular practice is to reverse this attitude so that we can reduce the intensity of our grasping and the attachment to ourselves and endeavor to consider the well-being of others as significant and important. When approaching Buddhist practices of this kind, where there is a suggestion that we should take harm and suffering upon ourselves, I think it is vital to consider them carefully and appreciate them in their proper context. What is actually being suggested here is that if in the process of following your spiritual path and learning to think about the welfare of others, you are led to take on certain hardships, even suffering, then you should be totally prepared for this. The texts do not imply that you should hate yourself or be harsh on yourself or somehow wish misery upon yourself in a masochistic way. It is important to note that this is not the meaning. Another example we should not misinterpret is the verse in a famous Tibetan text which reads, quote, may I have the courage, if necessary, to spend eons and eons, innumerable lifetimes, even in the deepest hell realm, unquote. The point that is being made here is that the level of your courage should be such that if this is required of you as part of the process of working for others' well-being, then you should have the willingness and commitment to accept this. A correct understanding of these passages is important. Very important, because otherwise you may use them to reinforce any feelings of self-hatred, thinking that if the self is the embodiment of self-centeredness, one should banish oneself into oblivion. Do not forget that ultimately the motivation behind wishing to follow a spiritual path is to attain supreme happiness. So, just as one seeks happiness for oneself, one is also seeking happiness for others. Even from a practical point of view, for someone to develop genuine compassion towards others, first he or she must have a basis upon which to cultivate compassion. And that basis is the ability to connect to one's own feelings and to care for one's own welfare. If one is not capable of doing that, how can one reach out to others and feel concern for them? Caring for others requires caring for oneself. The practice of Tonglen, giving and taking, encapsulates the practices of loving kindness and compassion. The practice of giving emphasizes the practice of loving kindness, whereas the practice of taking emphasizes the practice of compassion. Then the last verse. May all this remain undefiled by the stains of the 8 mundane concerns, and may I, recognizing all things as delusion, devoid of clinging, be released from bondage. So then His Holiness the Dalai Lama continues. He says, the first 2 lines of this verse are very critical for a genuine practitioner. The 8 mundane concerns are attitudes that tend to dominate our lives generally. They are becoming elated when someone praises you, becoming depressed when someone insults or belittles you, feeling happy when you experience success, being depressed when you experience failure, being joyful when you acquire wealth, feeling dispirited when you become poor, being pleased when you have fame, and being depressed when you lack recognition. A true practitioner should ensure that his or her cultivation of altruism is not defiled by these thoughts. For example, if, as I'm giving this talk, I have even the slightest thought in the back of my mind that I hope people admire me, then that indicates that my motivation is defiled by mundane considerations. It is very important to check oneself and ensure that is not the case. Similarly, a practitioner may apply altruistic ideals in his daily life, but if all of a sudden he feels proud about it and thinks, I'm a great practitioner, immediately the 8 mundane concerns defile his practice. As you can see, the instructions that you can find in the Lojong teachings on transforming the mind are very powerful. They really make you think. Up to this point, we have discussed all the practices that are related to the cultivation of what is known as conventional bodhicitta, the altruistic intention to become fully enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. Now, the last 2 lines of the 8 verses relate to the practice of cultivating what is known as ultimate bodhicitta, which refers to the development of insight into the ultimate nature of reality. So the last two lines read, and may I, recognizing all things as illusion, devoid of clean, be released from bondage. These lines actually point to the practice of cultivating insight into the nature of reality, but on the surface, they seem to denote a way of relating to the world during the stages of post-meditation. In the Buddhist teachings on the ultimate nature of reality, two significant time periods are distinguished. One is the actual meditation on emptiness, and the other is the period subsequent to the meditative session, where you engage actively with the real world, as it were. So here, these two lines directly concern the way of relating to the world in the aftermath of one's meditation on emptiness. This is why the text speaks of appreciating the illusion-like nature of reality, because this is the way one perceives things when one arises from single-pointed meditation on emptiness. In my view, these lines make a very important point because sometimes people have the idea that what really matters is single-pointed meditation on emptiness within the meditation session. They pay much less attention to how this experience should be applied in post-meditation periods. However, I think the post-meditation period is very important. The whole point of meditating on the ultimate nature of reality is to ensure that you are not fooled by appearances. It can often be deluding. With a deeper understanding of reality, you can go beyond appearances and relate to the world in a much more appropriate, effective, and realistic manner. I often give the example of how we should relate to our neighbors. Imagine that you are living in a particular part of town where interaction with your neighbor is almost impossible. And yet it is actually better if you do interact with them rather than ignore them. To do so in the wisest way depends on how well you understand your neighbor's personality. If, for example, the man living next door is very resourceful, then being friendly and communicating with him will be to your benefit. At the same time, if you know that deep down he can also be quite tricky, that knowledge is invaluable if you are to maintain a cordial relationship and be vigilant so that he does not take advantage of you. Likewise, once you have a deeper understanding of the nature of reality, then in post-meditation, when you actually engage with the world, you will relate to people and things in a much more appropriate and realistic manner. So His Holiness has more to say, but this point, His Holiness is not just, right, a spiritual practitioner in some cave, or a great Lama sitting on the throne just teaching all spiritual seekers. In that way, he is very relatable to all of us because he deals with people all the time. And a lot of times, he deals with very tricky people. People who do want to take advantage of him, people who do want to harm him. He deals with them, but never giving up the essence of Lojong, which is to develop care and concern for them, but not blind to the fact, as he says here, that they might be very tricky and very sneaky. You don't let them walk all over you. But neither do you, become angry with them, upset at them, try to harm them, which is the two extremes, that we fall back and forth, all the time. Yeah. So here His Holiness says, no, this is not how it works. Yeah. Seeing things clearly means you also see, It's sort of like you could say, seeing that, if a child is going to harm him or herself, yeah, you don't get angry at the child. But doesn't mean, oh, I'm not angry. You can do whatever you want. You don't do that either. You prevent them from harming themselves or harming others. So now final round of money mantra. We have done 10 rounds already. So we will do 1,100. Om mane beme hum 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 mane beme Om mane beme hum 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 mane beme
with the wish to free all beings,
I shall always go for refuge.
I shall always go for refuge.
To the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha.
To the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha.
Until I reach full enlightenment.
Until I reach full enlightenment.
Enthused by wisdom and compassion.
Enthused by wisdom and compassion.
Today in the Buddha's presence.
Today in the Buddha's presence.
I generate the mind of full awakening.
I generate the mind of full awakening.
For the benefit of all sentient beings.
For the benefit of all sentient beings.
As long as space endures.
As long as space endures.
As long as sentient beings remain.
As long as sentient beings remain.
Until then, may I too remain.
Until then, may I too remain.
And dispel the miseries of the world.
And dispel the miseries of the world.
At the end, His Holiness says, in conclusion, those who, like myself, consider themselves to be followers of Buddha should practice as much as we can. To followers of other religious traditions, I would like to say, please practice your own religion seriously and sincerely. And to non-believers, I request you to try to be warm-hearted. I ask this of you because these mental attitudes actually bring us happiness. As I have mentioned before, taking care of others actually benefits you. Now let's go back to the practice text that we have on page 9, the praise to Avalokiteshvara, which I've explained. It's also the instructions for the absolute bodhicitta training. Free in the realm of the great compassionate one, where good and bad are non-dual, appearances are without true existence, existing only in the manner of illusions. Within a state that is naturally pristine and without fixations is the boundless and pristine realm where attachment and aversion is liberated. To your realm, great compassionate one, I praise and pay homage. Ah Hong Hri Mani Padme Hum. Free the indivisibility of appearance and emptiness, the exalted body of the great compassionate one. This empty nature of appearances is like the reflections of the moon on water. Within this great ocean of the empty nature of appearances is the boundless and pristine exalted body of self-liberated empty appearances. To your exalted body, great compassionate one, I praise and pay homage. Ah Hong Hri Mani Padme Hum. Hri, the indivisibility of sound and emptiness, the exalted voice of the great compassionate one. This empty nature of sounds is like the sound of echoes. Within this great ocean of the empty nature of sounds is the boundless and pristine exalted voice of self-liberated empty sounds. To your exalted voice, great compassionate one, I praise and pay homage. Ah Hong Hri Mani Padme Hum. Hri, the indivisibility of clarity and emptiness, the exalted mind of the great compassionate one. This empty nature of clarity is the color of rainbows. Within this great ocean of the empty nature of clarity is the boundless and pristine exalted mind of self-liberated empty clarity. To your exalted mind, great compassionate one, I praise and pay homage. Ah Hong Hri Mani Padme Hum. Hri, the molten lava ground is the realm of the great compassionate one. The bull-headed Ava is the exalted form of the great compassionate one. Kill, kill, strike, strike are the sounds of the 6 syllables. Arrows, spears, and swords are the various offering materials. In the boundless and pristine expanse where happiness and suffering are self-liberated, to you, the great compassionate one of existence and appearances, I praise and pay homage. Ah Hong Hri Mani Padme Hum. Now the dissolution stage. Then again, remember the essence of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the essence of the Buddha of compassion, and your own essence are the same essence. So dissolve all three into each other. And let that all dissolve into the great expanse of the Dharma Dhatu. Continuing on page 14, I dedicate this merit to all my old mother sentient beings of the 6 realms. By this merit may I achieve the all-knowing state. May all who wander on the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death cross the ocean of samsara by defeating enemies of faults and delusions. Through this accumulation of precious merit dedicated to all migratory beings, may they never be separated from the sublime Dharma. By myself and others perfectly realizing the 2 benefits, may the melodious beat of the Dharma drum beautify this world. May the spread of Buddhist doctrine ever increase. May all sentient beings be blissful and happy. May they practice the Dharma through the day and night. May the 2 benefits of self and others be spontaneously accomplished. In all lifetimes, may I never be separated from the perfect gurus, but enjoy the richness of the glorious Dharma. Having thoroughly perfected the exalted qualities of the grounds and paths, may I quickly attain the state of Vajradhara. then a final prayer, a long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So I'm going to read this, and all of you can just listen to this. This is a long life prayer composed for His Holiness the Dalai Lama by Khenchen Mipo, who passed away 10 or more so years in eastern Tibet, a great Lama of contemporary times. You are Avalokiteshvara, the magical manifestation of compassion, supreme refuge and protector for all the beings of the land of snows. Tenzin Gyatso, a master of wisdom, love, and spiritual power, we pray that your life force never wavers and you remain long into the future. Through the power and truth of the unfailing Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, may your enlightened activity extend everywhere in all the 10 directions. May all your wishes be swiftly and unobstructedly fulfilled, and may you gain the glory of perfect mastery over the 3 domains. So we have finished. So again, as His Holiness say, if you want to do something for his birthday, chant the Mani mantra, chant it with bodhicitta, and then from his teachings that he gave on the 8 verses of mind training, take that to heart. And then he said, if there's any merit that comes from this, then you can dedicate to his long life and good health and continued ability to show by example and by words the essence of the Buddha's teachings, so that that can serve as a guide for all of us to achieve the same result. So that's it for this morning, this our joining with the rest of the world and recognizing and celebrating the 85th birthday of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So for those of you who are on Zoom, joining our Monday, Wednesday, Friday study group of the Gongchik, we'll take a brief break and then we will come back and continue our class. For those of you joining us on Facebook, we will end the live streaming now. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone.